Hi. So I know we have not done a review of Married to Medicine in like a month, and that's because it got boring when Quad left. So, and not even to be a mess because I am a Quad girl, but I'm also a Heavenly girl. I always have to like say that. So I like that at least on the last review, at least last week. I have to watch today, I believe. But last week, Heavenly kind of kiki with Carlos and said she needed Quad because they weren't talking about anything like she kind of kikied at the fact they were talking about this storyline with Simone getting this house for her sons, which we're going to talk about again this episode. Like, so I say before I get ahead of myself, I say all that to say Married to Medicine has been having some issues for me, and we will get into it. But we're back, and I'm excited to be back. And let's have a kiki. So we start off with something that I did enjoy. It was a conversation between Simone and Toya, and they're harkening back to what happened last episode, which had Twitter and a Twitter. And basically, Eugene had taken Toya on a date, and I don't mind that storyline at all, right? It's about their marriage, it's a personal story, it makes sense to me, and they're talking about, basically inviting more romance into their relationship, how things used to be versus how they are now. And Eugene makes an effort and he takes, Toya on a date. And she basically picks that date apart. And so I like for a first point, I like being able to see this conversation between Simone and Toya because it's clear. And again, I'm not a day one girly. I always like to let the girls know before there's a read following, because you don't want to read me, honey. Okay, we're going to speak on facts. But the thing is, I'm keying. The thing is, Simone and Toya have not always, from what I've seen, gotten along. And so now, when they are somewhat in the first word that comes to mind, cahoots, it sometimes seems like it's more of a strategic or like alliance type of thing and less of like a relationship. So I say all that to say it's nice to see these moments where they can come together and almost seemingly authentically have lunch and just talk and have a good conversation. You get to see the background behind this, what I still think isn't an alliance. So they're talking about, Toya's communication with Eugene and how basically it needs to evolve. Like Simone is giving her some really good advice. And I would have to agree. I understand what Toya is saying. It's very kind of textbook, right? I feel like a lot of relationships most likely go through this. But what you hear a lot, what Toya was saying was the things were contradicting themselves, but that's how Toya communicates. No shade to Toya. Sometimes I shade Toya quite a bit, but in this instance, no shade to Toya. But what she's saying, while it has merit, it is contradictory and, it is kind of textbook. And so I understand, but she keeps saying, well, this is how things used to be. This is how things used to be. And before Eugene even said it later in the episode, which I enjoyed to hear, and I don't date women, so I'm not really speaking on the dynamics between men and women and the old standards of blah, 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 whatever. Not my opinion, at least. But the thing is, while she was explaining it and saying, well, Eugene used to plan this and Eugene used to do this, I'm like, what's the problem with you doing it? You know what I'm saying? Like, I understand you want Eugene to still do it and continue to do it, but I was imagining, like, well, why don't you step in and do it sometimes as well? Which is a question that Simone posed, and which is something that Eugene spoke to later in the episode. So I appreciate that storyline. I think that it was interesting to watch. And I also think it was nice to be able to get a background of, Simone saying that Eugene had a conversation with Cecil, and basically he's afraid to plan things with Toya because she picks them apart. She's very critical. And they even went back to, when he planned a trip for her, wherever the hell they went, and she didn't have fun on that trip. She picked that apart as well. And so, I can sign up for that type of television. I think it matters. I think the timing was good. I think the conversation was nice. I think seeing the dynamic was cool. And then we move on. But I'm still going to need Quad in this episode. I know she's not coming. But, that worked for starts. If this episode wasn't anything, and I'll say it at the outset, it was definitely educational. And there's a tiny bit of shade in that, I'm going to be honest, because I do feel like it's Married to Medicine, and so it always comes with a bit of education. And while I do like it, sometimes it feels fillerish, and that takes me back to the episode with Kamala. Like, I feel like that was something that was not necessarily hyped up, but I think it was the whole Kamala thing. I think it was assumed to be something that was going to really kind of helped put this season on the map amongst other things. And amongst those other things that were supposed to help put this season on the map, it kind of fell flat for me. And it kind of felt like they were resting on the name of Kamala for it to be big, whereas the substance of the conversation and what was shown, at least on the show, and the story behind it and the context and where it went from there, it just felt very flat. While whereas, the education and the message is there, it's important, but it just felt like it was education and a message for the sake of being education and a message. Like, oh, you guys are going to love this because it's educational, it's a message, and it's a conversation between Dr. Jackie and Kamala. Those are big names. It's supposed to be a big deal, but it's like, no, what, we're viewers, and sometimes we say a lot of dumb stuff, especially on Twitter, but we have a little bit more brain than that. You got to give us a little bit more context. That's my personal opinion. And so the shade is, it's educational, but sometimes we get these educational moments just for the sake of being educational and just for the sake of being filler. And I feel like showing a difference between what is a housewife and what is a Married to Medicine. Even though we get some educational on housewives as well, you more so get that from Married to Medicine. And I feel like that's kind of the distinction they try to keep driving. But anyway, I digress. I really enjoy seeing T.S. Madison, obviously, coming from the LGBT community, or just in general. Like, I don't know, I can't really explain. It's not necessarily that, but that's a piece of it at its base. It's always just nice to see T.S. Madison on television. I love T.S. Madison's spirit, and I do feel like when you get T.S. Madison, you get not just education, but you get a perspective. So I thought that was fun, and I love that they use that opportunity, while educational, to talk about the trans stance in the community. And where I think it pushed itself forward is that they're talking about the trans experience as it relates to adversity coming from your own black community, right? It's not just about, the trans experience, just for the sake of talking about the trans experience and it being very universal. It was about, this is how black people are treating trans people and not just letting them exist and letting them be. So I appreciated being able to have that conversation, especially because T.S. Madison is a trans woman, a black trans woman, and a lot of times there can be this dissonance between, what people will say is cisgendered, women, so women who were born and identify as women, versus trans women, but some people don't even like the term cis. So, what I'm saying? It can be conflict, and it was nice to be able to see like a cisgender black woman have a conversation with a trans black woman about the disconnect in the black community. I appreciated that. It was also very interesting being a Housewives watcher and being a show that's on the same network as Housewives, to hear a conversation about Ozempic. And I didn't know what the hell Ozempic was, and when it first started popping up to my ears, at least, these shows weren't on to really talk about it and then talk about the ladies that were on it or whatever the hell. So it's nice I had to look it up. And Simone was basically echoing information that I saw on a quick Google search. And basically that, Ozempic is supposed to be used for, diabetics, and there's a shortage in the world. So there's a discrepancy with that. But a lot of people are using it for weight loss. And Simone even admits, like, if she needed to lose some weight, she would use it as well. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's a interesting conversation to have as well. It was more so something that I was looking to happen on Housewives, and it hasn't. So, and maybe not even from a medical standpoint, so it makes more sense here, at least, I guess. But I do like that they had that conversation as well. It was interesting to me. And then lastly, in this segment, we're kind of cutting back and forth between, we get to a point where we're cutting back and forth between doctor's visits. After T.S. Madison, we're getting doctor's visits with Dr. Jackie and a patient, and Dr. Simone and the patient. They're discussing different things. I know I took a jump. And then one of them, I didn't make specific notes, but they're also discussing, no abortions in Georgia. It was Simone's client. And basically saying, based on where you live, if you're not allowed to get abortions there, you have to travel out of state to get an abortion. And then, not only just traveling, but, obviously you live in that state, so you have insurance in that state. If you travel out of state, you don't have insurance. So you're paying out of pocket, costs for abortion. So I thought that was another important topic. So again, shade in that this episode could have been considered filler and educational, and just educational for the sake of being educational and staying on the point of Married to Medicine, but no shade because it was educational. They were really good topics. It was 3 of them, and I feel like they were covered very well. While that exists, and I wrote this specifically in my, both things can be true. I wrote this specifically in my notes. These were great topics. But, in all caps, and as stated in my iPad, it feels like they were trying to fill in the time of the episode. I'm not saying that it was a filler episode, which is why I want to be clear. I don't think it was a filler episode, but I think that within the episode, they were trying to take up some time because there wasn't necessarily as much content for this specific episode, if that makes sense. So not a filler episode, but a filler segment. And I feel like it was a little bit longer than it needed to be. Even though the information was great, topics were great, I learned a lot. I thought that it didn't feel forced. It didn't feel educational just to feel educational. It felt personal. Even though I'm not a woman. But I'm just saying, like, the way that the conversation went, it felt personal. Just the tone of it was good for me. But it just, the timing was not. We move on, and I think that can be shown by how many notes I have left. We move on, and basically, Sweet Tea, we're having a conversation about Sweet Tea's ongoing health issues, which I think, again, is fine for a personal story. This one is not a timing thing for me. It's more so of, I feel like this could have probably been filtered through the season a little bit more. I know the first part of the season, not necessarily the first half, but first parts of the season were more so about the wedding and the quad thing, right? I think we could have gotten the infertility stuff in a little bit earlier because it feels like we did the quad stuff, we had a break of filler episodes, and now we're coming in with this. It's kind of how it feels, and I wish that it had just been stretched out a bit more because I think it's a good story, it's a good personal story, and it could have been stretched out a little bit more, and it just was not. And now when you hear about it, while you want to know, and I think it's a good story, and I think it can be personal, it just kind of feels like they're throwing it in again, like it's just being thrown in again, and I don't think we're really getting much information to the point where it needs to be drawn out through the season like this, right? Like, we're getting some good info, but it's not 6 episodes worth, if that makes sense. But we do learn that she's going through the process, and now she does have to have the surgery, another surgery, I believe. I don't know if she had one before, but she has to have surgery, and they talk more so about the fact that it is going to she has to have a break. Like, I think they said it was like a 6-month break before she can try to conceive after the surgery. So basically it's pushing the finish line for them in terms of having children. Again, great topic, great information, but there's a different way that they could have gotten it out earlier and more succinct. That's my opinion. We get to the Simone thing. I try my best. I'm not huge on Simone. I'm going to be honest. Not that I dislike her or anything. She hasn't done anything for me to dislike her. But when I see her on TV, on the show, I don't necessarily get excited. And that's not a read. I'm just trying to explain what I mean by I don't go crazy about Simone. I just don't. And I never really was getting to a point where I felt like she doesn't bring anything to the show. And so I was really working with, even if you watch my prior reviews, I was really working with this storyline of the son things. I sat down, I had a conversation about it, especially as a millennial. I had a millennial perspective about it, and the fact that their parents have money and they can lean on their parents and stuff like that. Like, I really was trying my best to lean into this storyline. Now, similar to the Sweet Tea thing, it just feels very drawn out, and it's like, oh, this is what we're talking about this season for Simone, and I think that that's insane. You know what I'm saying? And it definitely encouraged me a little bit that even Heavenly kind of made that key that I referenced earlier, like, oh, we're talking about Simone getting this house for her sons, like, and she laughed it off and was like, I need quad. Like, it doesn't feel like the ladies are working. Not all of them, but most of them. Like, it just does not feel like they're working. Like, okay, what else is there? You know what I'm saying? I just don't think this song, I'm reading my notes because I'm like, I want to be sensitive to it. Not that it's a sensitive topic, but it's like, I'm trying to be sensitive to the fact that this is her personal story, but I don't think it's her best foot forward. But I just don't think it's a good storyline, and it's being dragged out. That's what my note says, and I'm just going to have to leave it there. Like, I'm trying to be nice. But I did make a note, and I will say, I thought it was interesting that Simone was like, it was a kiki, right? And she's talking about lease violations and how they shouldn't do this and how they shouldn't do this. And she did the black light thing. We talked about the black light thing 3 times now within 3 different episodes. It's so old. But I did think it was interesting that she's like checking for semen, and she says a thing like, semen shouldn't be all over the apartment. It should be in a condom going down the toilet. I'm thinking to myself, well, everybody knows that condoms are, or everybody should know, condoms are not supposed to be flushed down the toilet. I'm like, girl, you're looking for lease violations, but you are creating plumbing issues in your unit. Like, don't advise that. Pretty much the end of the episode is the Jackie and Simone PSA about maternity mortality rate. I always think really hard when I say, because I feel like I'm saying it wrong. They're doing a PSA, harkening back to the Kamala conversation. Okay, obviously this is a ongoing theme of the season. It doesn't feel necessarily like a storyline. I guess you could say that that's Jackie's storyline, like she's working towards that. But I don't know that a cause that you're working toward can be your storyline. So that's why I feel like it's generous for me to say it's a theme of the season. Like they're really trying to get the message out, which I think is awesome. And it's a through line and it's continuing. But the shade is that it kind of falls back and you start to think like, well, is that Jackie's storyline? And I just don't think that that's a storyline. I feel like Jackie could have done that, and that could have been the theme for the season, because obviously now all of the ladies are involved. They're doing the PSA, so it's kind of like a everything thing, everybody thing. Like, yes, it was curated by Jackie, but it kind of involves everybody now. And it's kind of summed up, and it's kind of like we get it. So I just feel like Jackie should have put a better foot forward this season too, and gave us something a little bit more to talk about. I think that that's so important. I love that they brought it up. I love that it was a theme of this season is what I'm going to keep talking about. And I love that people are able to get educated about it. It just could have been done better. And Jackie should have brought something else aside from that. And the last thing we get is something that has been given a soft illusion for a while. It's that, Dr. Alicia's husband is gonna be is she a doctor? Yeah, she's a doctor. Dr. Alicia's husband is going to be polarizing in some way. And I guess his thing is that, he's not, originally from America, so he has these different ideals. And he says specifically out his mouth, he feels like women have been running things for too long, and men are kind of losing their voice. Men don't have a voice anymore. And he's like, somebody has to take the lead, everybody, not too many cooks in the kitchen. It's interesting to have a character like that on TV. It's nice for personal story. It's nice for a new couple on the show. However, we are not getting it until the end of the season. It's not being fully developed. We don't have great context. I don't know who these people are that I'm watching, besides the fact that they've been used to bring on a polarizing topic to the show, which is great, but it's not really like a outstanding, mind-blowing topic. Like, it's something that we know, right? It was nice to hear the men educate him and say, like, women still don't make as much as men in America. They're still fighting for equal rights and things like that. That was fantastic. But we know. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, you guys did the right thing. Absolutely. My dad will always say, like, you're not supposed to congratulate people for doing what they're supposed to do. I'm sure there's that's an argumentative topic, but it just came to mind when I was thinking of it. But yeah, like, they said the right thing, you know what I'm saying? But does the story, is there a story there? Like, is there anything that's going to push anything forward? You know what I'm saying? And if so, why didn't we start talking about it earlier? Like, is there going to be a scene where we watch him and his wife have a conversation about it? Is she going to go to the women and talk about, oh, my husband thinks this? Are the women going to address him? I believe there's a clip where they do address him. But, is there a story here? Or is this just polarizing for the sake of being polarizing, just like casting Phaedra Parks on this show to do absolutely nothing? You know what I'm saying? So, and we're towards the end of the season, so I'm leaning toward it's not probably going to go much of anywhere, and they haven't really used it. So I think that there are some substantial issues with this show. I think similar to Potomac, there was this focus. I think there was more of a plot on Potomac. So, but I'll use a different characterization here. I think the focus was lost on trying to figure out what to do with the quad thing and paint that story some type of way. And they kind of lost focus of personal story, how to keep the season going. What is the actual overall dynamic of this group? How does this group make sense? who the hell is Dr. Alicia? Why are we to care what her husband thinks about women? I think we lost the plot there. And I think they're trying to pick it back up. And I think that they did an okay job in this episode. But I don't know if we have enough time to piece it all back together. So we'll have to see. But I'm here reviewing, so I think that says enough. There was at least enough content to me that I can come on and have a conversation. And I'm happy about that because I don't like having a show that I started to review and it has to sit around and I don't really have anything to say. But I genuinely had nothing to say. So we'll see what happens as we continue. And I will see y'all in the next one.